This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Yes, you heard that from the man himself. And no, I'm not referring to Becky Lynch in this scenario. If she even goes by the man anymore, I don't even know. But no, Brian Alvarez is right in this scenario. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. This is the YouTube wrestling podcast where Mondays and Fridays we bring you the most transparent and honest, top-of-the-line recap shows for wrestling today. One of the very few honest wrestling reviewers in the market today, so you've been forewarned. If you like truthful, in-depth analyses of professional wrestling and you are looking for someone that gives you spice and variety with the content we bring to the front line, welcome aboard. Highly encourage you to stick around. Before we get into the recaps, however, always important to get some of the initial plugs out of the way first. Make sure you comment, rate, and subscribe. Commenting being the most essential thing you can do to help me out in the YouTube algorithms. Again, that is 2 weekly podcasts we bring here on YouTube and Rumble. Link for the Rumble page will always be in the description for you to click as well. Monday's show is our weekly recap edition for AEW Rampage and NWA Powerrr. And our final segment of that show will be either dedicated to weekend pay-per-view events or news coverage. And in some circumstances, it will also be dedicated to analyzing some of my personal article content that I write for the Chairshot website. You can head on over to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab at the top of the page, and you will always find my work under the name Star. Or if you want a quick link, you can always check the description box for my most recent publication, and it will take you right over to the site for easy access. And Friday shows, we typically used to cover NXT and AEW Dynamite for that show, but if you watched my previous Friday show, you will know that I am going to be phasing NXT out of the equation and replacing that with some classic content. Specifically starting this week, we will be taking a look at NWA WCW, starting from the library of November 1985 and working our way up, as well as World Class Championship Wrestling from November of 82. And we'll start treating those shows as part of the Retro Review Series portion of the podcast. And of course, AEW Dynamite will be included in that review series as well. So stick around for that because it should be a lot of fun and you will be provided with some in-depth analysis on the wrestling that I grew up watching as a kid. Perhaps with some very different insight in comparison to when I was watching it, say, age 4. But that is for Friday's show. Today we are going to be taking a look at AEW Rampage and NWA Powerrr, as per usual format of the Monday show. And in the very last segment, we will take an in-depth look at my most recent publication with the Chairshot, all centered around Cody Rhodes, who seems to be in the foreground of all discussion when it comes to AEW right now. So I highly encourage you to stick around till the end of that conversation. I know some people would probably be thinking, well, Ring of Honor's been in the news as of late. Kind of figured you'd have something to say about that. To be honest, no, I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I think if you guys listen to various podcasts, you're gonna pretty much get every version of the opinion one way or another. I don't think me adding anything to the mix is going to change anything. Jim Cornette had a really good 40-minute discussion about it on his recent podcast on Sunday. Wrestling Observer's been talking about it pretty in-depth lately. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are talking about this to great lengths, so I don't really the other issue too is I don't really have a personal attraction or connection with Ring of Honor like a lot of wrestling fans do. I watched it, but I didn't appreciate it, if that makes any sense. So most of my coverage about Ring of Honor in terms of, what's going on with the company and Sinclair and talent getting cut and all that, I just don't feel like I'm going to be providing anything that no one else has already discussed at great lengths. So if we hear a little bit more about it in the future, maybe I'll throw my 2 cents in. But as of right now, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. Ring of Honor to me has kind of been one of those life support independent promotions for a long time now. Truthfully, it's sort of on par with my feelings about TNA and Impact when they got canned from Spike, 7 years ago, whenever it was. It's a company that exists, and with the ever rising popularity of companies like AEW and sort of I'm not going to say death of the independent scene, but just the mere fact that guys are getting signed up left and right by the two big wrestling promotions now in WWE and AEW. Companies like Ring of Honor just don't really seem like they have a place right now. I mean, obviously it's a great circuit for guys to hone their craft and develop themselves before getting signed with major promotions, if that is their intent at a later point. But I don't know. It seems like ROH has kind of just been a company that's toiled around for a long time now. So I don't want to say that this was evident to happen one way or another, but I guess I'm not all that surprised. So there's my brief analysis of the Ring of Honor situation. But for this show, like I said, we'll kick off and talk about Rampage and NWA, and then we'll conclude with my article about Cody at the very end. Let's start, though, with AEW Rampage from Friday night, which I guess one AEW show with a Halloween theme wasn't enough. They had to subject us to 2 semi-Halloween themed shows back-to-back. Well, let me start with this. Somehow I stumbled across an article in the last day that fans apparently left the show early during the tapings from Rampage. Apparently, hang on a minute. I just added this drop to the mix because I know I say this a lot. Apparently they taped all the higher profile matches before any of the more preliminary lesser important material, and people didn't stick around for it. And granted, I know it's not a live show, even though they try to sell it that way, but I mean, let's just make the argument for a minute that this is a live show. You got 3 matches booked for Rampage. You got Eddie Kingston versus Bryan Danielson, you got Britt Baker versus Abaddon, and you got Matt Sydal versus Dante Martin, which I guess they had to change last minute because Mike Sydal's hurt. And I think the intent was to do Leo Rush and Dante Martin versus the Sydals, which still isn't really all that much of a match worth getting hyped about, but still. So, out of the 3 matches I just listed, which one sounds like the most enticing match? Obviously, even a lizard brain could probably piece it together and figure Danielson versus Kingston is the bigger draw. So, what do? Well, of course, because they're idiots and they tape like 1,500 matches after Dynamite airs to cover their Dark Elevation and Rampage show, they put it on first. They taped the Danielson-Kingston match before the ladder matches on the show, and you know what? People said, we've had enough, we got what we came for, and we don't give a shit about the rest of the programming. And you know what? Why would they? Because I'll get to the Sydal Dante and Abaddon Baker match in a while, but if I'm a fan that bought a ticket for both shows, and I'm practically being forced to sit through a bunch of dark squash matches before we get to the match worth caring about, Danielson versus Kingston, I'm not going to fucking stick around to watch anything else after that. Who could possibly care about anything after watching Kingston versus Danielson? Live show or tape show? You really think the other two matches on the show were going to come anywhere close to following that? It's not even like Danielson versus Kingston was competing with an extra 30 minutes of SmackDown this week. Granted, apparently SmackDown ran reruns after the show instead of doing Talking Smack, so I guess Tony was afraid people would tune out the first part of the show if they put Seidel versus Dante on first. Which again should be a reflection of your so-called booking strategy when you're piecing your cards together, Mr. Booker of the Year. If you have such little confidence that Dante Martin versus Matt Seidel can maintain viewership, then don't fucking book the match. Simple, right? If the logic is Kingston versus Danielson needs to go on first so people stay tuned into the show over SmackDown reruns, then maybe you should at least try to construct a more appealing card to follow that than Matt Seidel versus Dante Martin and Britt Baker versus fucking Abaddon. Right? Or is this just the disgruntled old man yelling at the clouds persona coming out again? Because I know a lot of people were raving about this Bryan Danielson-Eddie Kingston match, and it was great. You know, a lot of people were allegedly saying this was better than the Omega Danielson TV match, and I probably wouldn't say that. And I'm not a Kenny Omega fan by any stretch. Truth be told, I actually kind of enjoyed the Danielson-Dustin match from last week even more than this. But don't get me wrong, it was a very enjoyable TV match, and also a true testament to just how underappreciated Eddie Kingston is in this company. He had a very hard-hitting back-and-forth match, but nothing they ever did got ridiculous at any point. Eddie spent a lot of the match chopping down Danielson, welting up his chest. Looked redder than the state of Wyoming. But, that was pretty much the entire story of the match. Kingston just beat on Danielson forever. It ended up building to the turning point deal where Danielson gave Kingston a beautiful, safe-looking belly-to-back suplex off the top rope. They traded some more exchanges with the crowd actually giving them a standing ovation right before the finish, which was kind of a cool moment. And, well, Kingston tried to crawl over to Danielson, who was laying in dead man's position, but he grabbed a hold of Kingston and put him in a triangle. And Kingston struggled for a little bit, but eventually flipped Danielson the bird and passed out in the hold. And albeit, it was a bit choreographed for my liking, and the middle finger deal is done to death in AEW. It just really loses its substance. Kind of like when everyone has to drop the word shit in their promos 38 times in one take. But like I said, I very much enjoyed the action here. The whole New Japan slugfest trading can really be difficult to pull off because it either ends up looking great with guys making everything they do look legit with the exchanges and feeding for one another, or it ends up just looking really choreographed and goofy. And it's a line where Jim Cornette and I are still kind of teetering back and forth on. He usually does not enjoy those kinds of matches where guys are exchanging blows and trying to do the game of can you top this. And I can certainly understand where he's coming from because, yes, a lot of the time it does look horrible and clear as day the guys are overly cooperating with one another. But I found that it worked with the Danielson-Suzuki match a couple weeks back, and I think what they did here, it worked too. So, very good tournament match. Not something I'd classify as like a top 10 match of the year or anything, but certainly one I'd recommend people check out if they have not seen it yet, which, if you follow the company, I'm sure you've seen it in some capacity. So up next we had CM Punk doing an interview with Tony in the back. No time traveling from Shivani this week, interestingly enough. Anyway, Punk's trying to do a promo when Eddie Kingston starts flipping his shit in the background. Ends up getting in Punk's face before he gets separated by some people, including Ruby Riott, of all people. Oh, God damn it, people. No need to fear. The 115-pound Ruby here to rescue and hold back two grown-ass men. Aside from that, I mean, if this is what they're building toward for Punk's Full Gear pay-per-view match, great. I'll take it. I love both guys. I think Kingston working more of a tweener role instead of a traditional babyface is a much better fit for him going up against a guy like CM Punk. I think the promos alone would make that feud worthwhile. Yeah, I'm totally down for that program. I just kind of hope it's not a one and done blow off, because I think an actual long term Punk Kingston program in AEW could be pretty big if they actually spent time building it up, but I guess we'll see what they do. We briefly cut back to the commentary booth, and here's the extent to what my notes read: Chris Jericho's wig. That is all. Probably the fullest head of hair we've seen on Jericho in almost 20 years. Doesn't look a day over 40 with that headgear. Anyway, moving along with the show, unfortunately. Up next was Matt Sydal versus Dante Martin. It's interesting here, too, because in that same article I was reading about fans leaving early during the tapings, I guess people were talking about how there was an audible chant of "We want flips" going on throughout portions of this match. I mean, I didn't pick up on anything. If there were people chanting "We want flips," first of all, fuck those people. And second of all, I could not hear anything picked up on the main audio. So, I mean, I didn't hate the match or anything, but it's already hard enough for me to get invested in babyface versus babyface matches to begin with. Like, especially when you have white meat mid-card guys like Matt Sydal and Dante Martin. Like, AEW does plenty of babyface matches, but in order for you to pull them off effectively, you gotta have the right guys in there. Like Danielson and Dustin is a prime example. The fans obviously love Daniel Bryan, and Dustin Rhodes will always have a natural admiration from the crowd, so that is a circumstance where you can do face versus face and make it work. The problem with guys like Dante and Sydal is that, while yes, both guys are essentially baby faces, a guy like Matt Sydal is not over to the extent that he can carry a competitive back and forth match with Dante with fans sticking behind him. So what ends up happening is you get long periods of plateaued apathy from the crowd here, where Sydal is working over Dante, but he's not really generating heat of any sort because the fans don't really want to boo Sydal. Of course, you pin him up against a guy like Dante Martin, who's starting to gain a lot of traction and fan support. Yes, of course, he's going to be naturally more over than guys like Sydal, who fans appreciate but are not as invested in as a guy like Dante. So, it was just a weird match. For my money, I don't know why they didn't just do Lio Rush versus Matt Sydal with Dante sort of playing the conflicted babyface on the outside. Like, Leo's obviously a heel. I don't think they're trying to blur the lines in any way with that. The problem is trying to discern on what side of the fence Dante Martin falls on. So at least if they did Lio Rush versus Matt Sydal with a clear-cut face and a clear-cut villain, you could play up a story with Lio trying to actively get Dante involved and help him win throughout the match and play up more of that story. I don't know. This just didn't work for me, I guess. Fine wrestling match, but I really just couldn't get into it. Dante won clean, but other than that, I didn't really get any sense of storyline advancement coming out of it. And that said, well, I guess that brings us to the main event, doesn't it? One that hopefully I never have to speak of her ever again, having watched her in a singles match for the first time. It is Britt Baker versus Abaddon in a no DQ street fight. And actually, I think a much more fitting match that Tony should have considered for the night was the entire women's division versus the standard breakaway table. I'll spoil the finish for you. Breakaway table wins. And as I sat blankly just staring at my TV monitor, pondering to myself how I even begin to dissect something like this, I started thinking, okay, so now I have to decipher what gave me a greater headache by the end. the Dark Order Elite Costume Fuckfest from Dynamite, or Britt Baker and Abaddon trying to do something resembling professional wrestling and not sports entertainment? It's a real toss-up. Because, on the one hand, I can at least make the case that as bad as that Dynamite main event was, at least there were a couple notable spots. Like, the Hangman Page reveal under the Marshmallow Man outfit did generate the biggest pop of the night. But on the other hand, this Rampage main event was like 10 to 15 minutes shorter. So, albeit I suffered greatly trying to sit through both, you put a gun to my head and you told me I had to rewatch one of these catastrophic main events, I'll probably pick the Baker-Abaddon match. At least it was short. And I could get some mild entertainment out of watching both girls try to fail several times, putting one another through a table. Because I at least cracked a smile at watching that show, whereas I don't think I ever felt anything after that Dynamite main event but rage and pure irritation. And yes, Britt did take bumps through tacks here because A, she's an idiot, and B, I guess she still thinks that thumbtack bumps are a thing that people give a shit about in pro wrestling anymore. They're not. And I could prove that because as soon as Abaddon pulled out the black bag from under the ring, not a single person in the crowd reacted at all. Probably all thinking to themselves, oh great, another fucking spot with tacks. Can't think of anything else original, can we, people? Anyway, I don't know what happened in the finish, but I remember Britt won. So unfortunately for Miss Abaddon, or I presume it's Miss Abaddon. Not really sure what that is. I mean, I would not want to misgender anyone in this particular circumstance because that would be very ignorant of me to not be able to decipher any one of the newly constructed 748 genders on the spectrum. Anyhow, Abaddon gets rolled up and pinned, so we will unfortunately not be seeing a three-way at the pay-per-view with Abaddon included for her championship opportunity. Bummer, man. So yeah, that sucked. Honestly, I was really conflicted when the show was over. Obviously, the opener was great. And like the follow-up deal with Punk and Kingston backstage was very well done, I thought. And I mean, I won't even say like the Matt Sydal Dante Martin match was bad because it wasn't. I just couldn't get into it, and I really haven't been a huge fan of that story from the jump. The main event was bad, but it was at least offensively short. I don't really know what the mentality was going into the show. I guess they kind of figured no one was watching because like the World Series, but I mean, if you're telling me the best AEW had to offer for a TV main event was Britt Baker and Abaddon in a furniture match, like, is phoning it in too much of a cliche at this point? For me, it's not even worth elaborating on. But again, knowing how AEW fans work, they'll probably say something outrageous like, best episode of Rampage of the year. And if you think I'm joking about that, go read some of the reports for the show. I'm not exaggerating that much. Anyway, let's move on to NWA Powerrr here, which it really hasn't particularly been on my good side in the last couple weeks. Yeah, this show's really taken a dump on me in the last couple weeks, hasn't it? I'll start with this, because my original plan going into this show was to recap the By Any Means Necessary show that streamed on Fight TV on the 27th. And well, it's not the first time streaming experiences have gone poorly for me. I got about a minute or so into the show, had a considerable amount of buffering take place, and much like my rule of thumb that I applied to the first night of the G1 show when I had trouble getting past the first couple matches, I gave it about 2 more attempts, and I said, fuck it, I'm not doing this. So, I tried to rewatch the show the next day, only to then go to NWA's library on the Fight TV site, and I couldn't find the fucking show. It's like it never existed. I tried going through a library of illegal streaming sites to find the show. Couldn't find anything there. I figured YouTube wasn't going to be a valid option. I tried Dailymotion. I tried Vimeo. Like, I kid you not. It is like that show never occurred. Like, I'm totally baffled right now. Because I watched NWA 73 on delay, and I was able to find multiple streaming services that had both that show and the Empower show from the previous night. But I have absolutely no idea what's going on with this By Any Means Necessary card. Like, if anyone gets to this point in the podcast and has comments or suggestions, please inform me as to what I'm missing. If you actually are going out of your way to watch NWA content, because the mere fact that there's not a single recap of the show and or stream of the show makes me wonder if there's more to the story that I'm missing. Like, By Any Means Necessary was actually very apropos for a pay-per-view title, because as God is my witness, by any means necessary was I looking forward some way to watch the show on delay, and I struck out in just about every way imaginable. So, luckily for me, NWA tried to make up wasting 2 hours of my life earlier this week with this episode of Powerrr by presenting to me an all-women's themed edition. It's fucking goody. I'm sure Mickie James had a say or two in that idea, and boy did she ever make it clear in the main event what her intentions are with this whole women's empowerment movement in the NWA. Don't you ever think for a minute she doesn't have an ulterior motive. I see right through your bullshit, Mickie. I've watched professional wrestling far too long enough. I know what a vanity project is when I see it. And, I mean, I'll be honest up front, I glossed over a lot of the show this week just because, well, I don't really want to watch a full hour's worth of women's matches. Not really my flavor, and it doesn't really represent the National Wrestling Alliance to me. Yeah, credit where it's due. I respect them for trying new things and looking for ways to bring new eyeballs to the product, but sorry, man. An all-women's themed wrestling show ain't drawing shit. Not unless you're constructing an entire card of bra and panties matches. And we begin the show with not women, interestingly enough. We begin with Scion doing a promo on Austin Idol and Tyrus. And apparently he will be facing Tyrus for the TV title on December 4th, which I guess is their next pay-per-view. And considering my tragic experience attempting to stream the By Any Means Necessary show and getting nothing out of it but a receding hairline, I don't even want to think about another upcoming NWA pay-per-view right now. Opening match was Chelsea Green versus Kylie Ray versus Melina in a three-way to determine the number one contender for Camille's title. They wrestled for about 5 minutes. Most of it was very sloppy. And, well, Melina won, predictably. I don't have anything against any of the women here. In fact, I'm on record saying I've actually started to grow to enjoy Kylie's matches in NWA. And Melina had a very good match with Deonna Purrazzo at the last women's pay-per-view. And, there is a genuine interest for me in seeing her and Camille for the women's title. But, I mean, this really didn't do a whole lot for me. And I guess I lied because I said I don't have anything against these three women, but Chelsea Green was involved here, and she's probably right on par with the same kind of go-away heat I have with Taryn Terrell at the moment, who peculiarly enough had sort of just disappeared from the programming in recent weeks, but unfortunately graced herself on the show this week. Camille beat Tootie Lynn in a short match. Nothing else to really note about that one. They tried to play up some kind of story here where if Tootie beat Camille, she'd get a title match. And I guess Camille went in just expecting a normal tune-up match, but she was kind of caught off guard when Kyle Davis made the announcement. But I mean, Camille won anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Lady Frost and Sky Blue wrestled in a Mildred Burke Rules match, which basically is just the old territorial Bill Watts rule from Mid-South UWF, where you just can't do closed fists, no over-the-top rope throws, and can't do offensive moves off the top rope. So in other words, you're just telling two green girls to do a bunch of awkward-looking arm drags and takedowns for about 5 minutes. And they tried to tell a story here, but generally the match wasn't all that good. Lady Frost's finisher is a moonsault, so they basically did the deal where she kept going up top and had to stop herself. Eventually she got fed up with it. Sky Blue yanked her down, and Frost just rolled her up and pinned her anyway by using her tights. But by the way, I love how Lady Frost's gimmick is that she carries along all of the stereotypical bad metaphors that they used to associate with Glacier back in the day. She's the coolest wrestler you'll ever meet. I think Velvet made a joke somewhere in here about her getting frustrated at some point in the match. What do they say her finisher is? Something involving snowballs, I think. Like, it literally is just as bad as Shivani and Heenan sitting on commentary trying to call a Glacier match with a straight face. And we all know how great Heenan was when he was phoning it in on WCW TV. So then we get to the best part of the show. And how ironic, it was a promo segment with Kratos and The End. Kratos and Mae Valentine did some back and forth deal about the whole women's empowerment deal and sunshine and rainbows and yay girl power. And eventually The End came out, got in his face, and Powerrr actually ended up doing a really passionate promo, which I think we were intended to boo, but whether he realized it or not, he ended up cutting a pretty fiery babyface promo. And his Powerrr's threatening to basically destroy anyone on the roster, men, woman, or manager, really got me thinking. With the whole current hostile climate of male-female competition and the whole persistent push for transgenderism, abdicating for ridiculous things like transgender male athletes and fighters having competitive fights with biological males in sports like mixed martial arts. Honestly, it really would not surprise me at this point to see a company like NWA start booking intersex matches on their shows from time to time. Because, female empowerment, right? Who wouldn't want to see Camille wrestle a match with Powerrr? But, and like I said, easily the best thing on the show, not even close. Up next was the Hex versus whoever the two girls are that are part of Taryn's crew for the women's tag belts. And I already had one finger on the mute button knowing Taryn was involved here, but luckily they didn't do a promo beforehand. God bless. Again, like I said, there were large portions of the show where I just kind of went in and out of watching, and I really didn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on the match here. I remember the Hex won, and that's really all I care to say about. Small favors, though. No Taryn promo. So I can go to bed tonight being glad I won't have Taryn's screechiness piercing my eardrums. We had a quick Melina promo where basically she just said the title match with her and Camille is very important and the women's title is her destiny. Fine promo. Too much crying for me, but I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised. Oh boy, and then we had the main event. Mickie James versus Kiera Hogan. A match that, if I recall correctly, was set up when Kiera came out during a Mickie promo, straight up challenged her to a match, and, well, Mickie got pissed about it. Why? I don't know, but apparently in her mind it was unprofessional. So, like, I figured going in they were going to play it up as babyface versus babyface, possibly with Kiera acting more aggressive or something. Then, of course, after the opening bell, they shake hands like nothing ever previously happened. All right, then. Anyway, it was a fine technical wrestling match. A lot of chain holds, and you can tell Mickey was calling a lot of spots throughout it. I don't think I'd consider anything they did particularly bad, nor was it particularly exciting. They did some trading toward the end. Mickey ended up getting dropped face first into the corner pad. Kira kind of ran wild, got a couple near falls, and pretty much the end deal was Kira going for Mickey's spike DDT, but Mickey rolled through and Schoolboy pinned Kira for the 3. And if I had a soundbite for a fart, I would probably play it, but I don't have anything queued up here. That's all I really have to say about it, to be honest. Mickey wins. I think that'll be my new hashtag when she starts putting herself over all these women empowerment shows. Lol, Mickey wins. Not really the show I was expecting going in, and overall, not really a theme show I ever want to see again. Which, of course, may sound sardonic, because you're probably thinking, well, wait, didn't you just review an all-women's theme pay-per-view not that long ago? And the correct answer is yes, I did. However, number one, that was sort of a first-time trial pay-per-view for the NWA to see if it would stick. And number two, there were a handful of matches on that show that I was genuinely interested in seeing. And as it turns out, there were a couple real solid matches on that show. But the whole idea of trying to run with these all-women themed power shows once in a blue moon, it just feels way too contrived to me. It's like they're trying to actively push a narrative that the women in NWA are a much bigger draw than they really are. And I just don't see it. Like, Camille's a decent worker, and she's getting a lot more comfortable and solid on the stick, but, you know, to say she's at a level like a Thunder Rosa or a Serena Deeb is just crazy. And, you know, Melina's good too, but, you know, she's also been around for a long time. She kind of understands the business. But I just don't see the market for doing all women themed power shows. You know, especially when you don't have girls like Serena and Thunder Rosa around anymore. It just seems too forced to me. The Empower pay-per-view made sense as an experimental idea to garner some attention to the product. And in hindsight, I can't really say it made all that big a difference, if any. There's just not a big enough market out there for wrestling fans to warrant all women-themed TV shows or pay-per-views. Yes, there will always be companies like Shimmer or Shine to fill that niche gap. There are wrestling fans out there that genuinely enjoy women's wrestling. I enjoy women's wrestling. When it's good. As you will hear me constantly say over and over again, I absolutely appreciate women's wrestling. I will watch women's wrestling, and I will advocate for women's wrestling when it is good. But companies like Shimmer and Shine, they are niche products. And there is a reason for that. The key word in that sentence is niche. It's why, you know, to be honest with you, it's why I got so frustrated with NXT trying to do this 50-50 shit with equally featuring men's and women's segments on a given show. There is just not enough good female talent on the level of the men to substantiate that booking strategy. Most of the time, it ended up dragging the shows down. There was one period in modern professional wrestling where I would consider women being booked on the television program consistently and tearing the house down. And it was a period in NXT where they had Rhea Ripley, Shayna Baszler, and Io Shirai and Mia Yim, and like basically some of the best female talent on the market in the industry at that point. Kind of like when AEW was still, you know, experimenting with the Riho problem. So I'm not going to sit there and say that, you know, I don't enjoy seeing women's wrestling on the show, but in modern wrestling history, that was like the only point where I would say the women were one of the better parts of the show. You know, and I know that all the people will say, "Whoa, TNA and Awesome Kong, Gail Kim back in the day, they were the biggest ratings draws on the show." Yeah, and What are you pairing that up against? A bunch of X Division guys that no one gave a shit about? A world title scene where Kevin Nash and Jeff Jarrett were wrestling for the belt? Like, you think it's any wonder wrestling fans got invested in Awesome Kong and Gail Kim? It's not like the men were being booked to do anything credible on that show at that point. I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, like, as much crap as I give AEW from week to week, and as bad as a lot of their women's matches are, at least Tony has the wherewithal to understand his fan base and say, we don't need 3 women's matches on the same show. It's not a big enough draw, and our talent pool is too deep to feature the women and the men to the same degree. And even in a company like NWA with a much smaller audience and fan base, your male roster still outweighs the female roster by leaps and bounds, both physically and figuratively speaking. And I feel like I have to keep on, reiterating the whole male-female dynamic speeches on every show, but I'm going to keep stating this until someone gets a clue, because every major wrestling organization has this problem of operating under the same formula of this blank slate equalism mentality. It is okay to admit that the majority of the women in professional wrestling are not as athletically gifted as the male talent. I don't understand why this is so controversial. You should still have women's segments on the show. You should still build feuds around the women. But you cannot intentionally circumvent reality and drawing power. And as much as people hate hearing this, it still reigns true in modern times, just like it did 50, 60 years ago. Women are an attraction in professional wrestling, but they are not the attraction. And no amount of manufactured imposing of all women's themed anything in pro wrestling is going to change that fact. Not until you're able to present me with clear-cut data and evidence that women outdraw men in wrestling on a box office level that moves the needle forward. And if you need any further evidence of this, WWE tried this at WrestleMania with the Ronda Rousey experiment. It failed. So there you go. All right. Said I wanted to dedicate the last section of the show to talk more in depth about this whole Cody Rhodes story, because it has been at the forefront of my intrigue in the last few weeks, and I think there's a real discussion worth having here that goes way deeper beyond anything strictly wrestling related. Little side note here. I am an avid reader of philosophy, and many of the great intellectual thinkers like Nietzsche and Freud. Big fan of some of the more modern thinkers of our time like Steven Pinker and the Weinstein brothers, Jordan Peterson. And, professional wrestling is sort of a psychological trickery in and of itself. And when you start applying old school forms of thought like kayfabe and like how that's played into the development and progression of wrestling throughout history, they do pair hand in hand. And I published an article on the Chairshot on October 27th entitled AEW Fans vs. Cody Rhodes, the most compelling feud of 2021. And the term I constantly revert back to throughout this article is all centered around my thesis of artificial reality. And I know on the surface that just sounds like a conjectural mumbo jumbo, but if you really take a deep dive into how this has been brewing, like not just in the last couple months since the Malachi Black feud started, but just how Cody's commitment to AEW has panned out in the last year or so, this whole dilemma has roots that go way deeper than we think. Let me start with the top of the article here with my opening paragraph, just to sort of lay the groundwork for the rest of the article. And I'm going to be pulling quotes throughout my reading here. Quote, "The dualistic nature of kayfabe versus reality in professional wrestling can be incredible at times. We ostensibly understand that this is a form of scripted entertainment, yet we engulf ourselves with the long-standing preconceived notions that professional wrestling is authentic and real to the extent that we understand wrestling to be real. However, the professional wrestling business often finds itself wrestling with its fixed adversary, the fans. To put this contextually, how often have we historically seen the fans desire and crave a particular storyline, match, finish, or fall, or character to be featured, while the company insists on a particular storyline, match, finish, or character that fans have no desire to see. Unquote. What I'm outlining in this opening here is that with wrestling fans becoming smart to the business, the old order methodology of strategic booking in professional wrestling to garner heat so that people pay money down the road to see the good guy seek his revenge, that has basically been cast aside at the expense of the modern fan's natural impulse for what I call immediate gratification. We don't care about long-term strategic booking. We just want to see our desired outcome in the here and now. So by that argument alone, the wrestling fans live in the term that I've coined, artificial reality. Our perceived world of what we're watching and experiencing on our TVs each week. But the fans are not exclusive to this type of artificial reality viewing experience because, as I state in my next paragraph, quote, Cody Rhodes is subject to the same intuitionism. From the fans' genuine perspective, pragmatic or not, Cody is a self-serving, egotistical antagonist that sees himself as a greater and more prominent deal than his character reflects on television. They may even resent him for strategically using AEW as a platform to further launch his personal career while partially detaching himself from the same creation that helped to respark those fans' love for the same business that Cody claims to share with them. All the while, Cody does not recognize this reality as a truthful representation of his own reality. Unquote. So pausing here, keep in mind that what I'm reading to you is the reality in which the fans see Cody. This is how they view him through the lens of both his character reflected on TV and his genuine, authentic identity off camera. So here's where things get more damning, because now let's analyze this from Cody's reality. Quote, Cody views himself as the genuine Lionheart protagonist, a savior to the business and to the disgruntled, discouraged wrestling fans that share his same values and passions for professional wrestling. Cody maintains a common bond with the AEW fans, one that has worked in unison to successfully grow AEW's product in a mere 2-year time span. Unquote. So what you're seeing here is the dualistic nature of conflict between the perception of both parties at the root level kayfabe presentation of the product and the actual real-life perceptions. That's the feud. That's the most damning piece of evidence that makes this conflict so enticing. Because really, which side is right? Who's the real babyface and heel in this storyline? The fans have a valid case in their own right that yes, in fact, it's true. Cody has used AEW to further his personal acting career and has simultaneously removed his full and undivided attention to the exact bond that he and the fans once shared. He did not commit. He did not carry that pledge with the fans. He's the one founding father of AEW that stepped away to pursue other passions, and all the while, the building blocks of AEW, the Kenny Omegas, the Beta Bucks, the Hangman Pages, those guys didn't leave. Those guys committed. Those guys stuck around through thick and thin. And that's why, despite the fact that I may have my issues with guys like Omega and the Bucks, there's a reason that they will always have a modicum of respect from the AEW fans, regardless of whether or not they're working as good guys or bad guys on the show. Cody's lost all that respect in the eyes of the fans. So the fans have their valid points. But you look at it from Cody's vantage point, because he understands the importance of that bond with the AEW fans. He understands that without the fans, AEW would have been a one-stop trip, and after that initial All-In show, there is no Dynamite. There is no Rampage. There is no further continuation of the product after that one show. And Cody is eternally grateful for that. So when he looks at the situation, he cannot conceptualize the idea that that bond would break. So, what is the real dividing line here that separates these two forms of thought? Well, as I stated in my article, it is the argument of artificial reality and praxeological reality. Quote, the truth is that praxeology is far easier to see and digest than an augmented, distorted reality. Any pragmatist would easily determine that, based on the current reflection of AEW's television, Cody's character vision is far more difficult to rationally prove, unquote. Put it in context for a minute. Take a casual TV watcher, wrestling fan or not, doesn't matter. Sit them down in front of the TV and ask them to try and decipher whether or not Cody is a bad guy based on the way the crowd reacts to him. Logically, a casual fan, non-wrestling fan, doesn't matter. He or she immediately hones into the crowd boos and determines, well, the people boo him, so evidently he's a villain. It's praxeological rationalizing. They're not viewing it through the lens of Cody's ideology. And how could they? And they're not mind readers. All they have is what's being presented right in front of them to make that conclusion. Okay, so then you start to think, well, obviously, with every great storyline comes a great payoff, right? So, what's the finish? What's the solution? Well, that's where the gravity of the story comes into play, because what lens are we analyzing the situation through? If we're pragmatists and we're looking for something logically conclusive, okay, the solution is very simple. As I dictate here in my article, quote, in order for Cody to reflect a more empirical version of himself on television, he must embrace his villainous nature. He must sacrifice his sovereign preconceived perceptions of his self-image to better reflect the truth that exists on scripted television. Unquote. That is a practical way to do it. That is the logical method to handle it. But there's a problem. Continuing on, quote, however, this ideal purely exists with the understanding that Cody recognizes this truth, unquote. So now we're removing the praxeology and we're replacing it with the artificial reality point of view. Because like we already established earlier, clearly Cody does not see himself as the villain. He's not the bad guy. So the idea of a suitable payoff being Cody should just turn heel, as you hear so many people, positing is the best option. Well, in order for that to work, there has to be a mutual pragmatic understanding of the reality. Cody does not recognize that praxeological reality, blindly or not. Like, if we're being honest, you know what a heel turn would do for a guy like Cody in the long haul? You know what that is? It's validation. It is ego-driven recognition. It's, you're acknowledging me. To perfectly quote one of Roman's catchphrases. So, really, who wins in a scenario like that? Like, yeah, the fans might get heel Cody in the short term, but do the fans actually win? I mean, I think a heel turn is futile at this point. Moving along here, quote, perhaps the most probable answer is to respond with sheer indifference. How can one's ego generate further validation by means of apathy and passive taming? If the fans want to win the fight over Cody's distorted reality, booing merely feeds the beast, whereas indifference and unresponsiveness can magnify one's humility, unquote. I know that sounds weird, like, what, so we just sit on our hands during Cody segments and pretend we don't care? Or we voluntarily leave our seats to go get refreshments or merchandise or something like that? The answer is yes. Because by you showing no attention to Cody, you are essentially creating what so many people misrepresent as peacefully protesting. You're saying, we aren't going to give Cody any validity. And reacting is merely just going to boost his ego one way or another. So by us directing our attention away from Cody, by walking out, so to speak, that's the ultimate middle finger. Now, of course, I know that will never happen. You can't drum up an entire arena of 10,000 plus fans to just voluntarily leave during a Cody segment. But you could certainly drum up several hundred. You could certainly use social media as a means to reach out to people, to get people to rebel against Cody's segments if you feel so passionately about him. I mean, let's throw the hypothetical dice on the board game there. It would be very interesting to see how AEW responds if they took notice of even 30 to 40% of the crowd walking out during a Cody segment on TV. You think they won't respond to that? Just saying. So, again, this article is on the Chairshot site right now. The link's in the description. You can go take a look at it if you want. But like I said at the beginning of the segment, man, this is by far the most intriguing feud in all of professional wrestling right now. And, you know, I know for the people that are sitting there thinking, well, it's just the John Cena problem all over again. No. It is way more than that. Trust me. The John Cena crowd split thing, that's been a meme for years in WWE. The Cody situation is far different because whether people want to recognize it or not, there really isn't a segmented fan base like there was with Cena. Like, Cena always had that dividing line between the kids and the adults. And Cena was always a primary attractor to younger kids. AEW does not have that segmented audience, not to the extent that WWE does. At its core, AEW fans are primarily in that 18 to 49 demo, and that includes the people that buy tickets to go to those live shows. You know, and whereas Cena spent years dismissing the crowd split and was essentially genius enough to turn it up against the fans and use it as a joke, Cody's different. Because you can tell this bothers him a lot. And the fans are smart enough to know that affiliating guys like Arn Anderson and Dustin Rhodes in the mix, they aren't going to cover the problem. You know, same thing with Cody going out there and cutting overly scripted promos about Dusty every so often. Like, the fans recognize it's a blanket sheet covering, and they're not buying it. You know, it's like when Roman Reigns won the Royal Rumble and they tried to send Rock out there as a filter to drown out the boos, and it utterly failed. It's a different business right now. So, I think that'll about wrap things up for the show today. Again, the link for that article is in the description for you to check out. Otherwise, you can go to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab, and you'll find at the top of the article content there. I will be back here on Friday to begin our new classic content review series where we will deep dive into NWA WCW beginning from November of 85 and World Class beginning from November of 82. And we'll go through each week, revisit some childhood memories of back when professional wrestling used to be great. We'll also review AEW Dynamite on that show as well, so you can expect more of that. And again, make sure you guys comment, rate, and subscribe, and come back each Monday and Friday if you like the show and you want to stay posted with all future FSWR content. Real important, click that notification bell too, because that'll keep you updated when the posts go up on YouTube. Until then, take care all. Peace.